Welcome to Orbit into Sleep. I'm so glad you're here tonight. This is your space, quite literally, to drift off, let go, and allow the world outside to fade quietly away. Tonight, we're heading somewhere extraordinary. We're going to float gently alongside the International Space Station, high above the Earth, where the sun rises 16 times a day and the stars never blink. This video is called Relaxing Space. ISS, Facts to Fall Asleep To. Before we begin, if you're enjoying this channel and you find it helpful for winding down, it would mean the world to us if you took just a moment to like this video and subscribe to Orbit into Sleep. It truly helps other people who are looking for a little peace at the end of their day find their way here. And we'd love to know, if you don't mind leaving it in the comments, roughly how many hours of sleep do you normally get each night? We're all in this together, whatever that number looks like for you. Now, find your most comfortable position. Maybe you've already turned down the lights. Maybe you're already tucked in, the duvet pulled up, the day beginning to soften at the edges. That's exactly where we want you to be. There's nothing you need to do tonight, nowhere to be, no decisions to make. Your only job, if you can even call it that, is to breathe slowly and let the words wash over you. If you fall asleep halfway through something, that is not a failure. That is the whole point. That is the most wonderful thing you could possibly do. So settle in, take one slow, easy breath, and let's drift up, past the clouds, past the blue, and into the dark, to one of the most remarkable places a human being has ever called home. 16 sunrises. I'm so glad you're here tonight. This is your space, quite literally, to drift off, let go, and allow the world outside to fade quietly away. Tonight, we're heading somewhere extraordinary. We're going to float gently alongside the International Space Station, high above the Earth, where the sun rises 16 times a day and the stars never blink. This video is called Relaxing Space ISS, Facts to Fall Asleep To. Before we begin, if you're enjoying this channel and you find it helpful for winding down, it would mean the world to us if you took just a moment to like this video and subscribe to Orbit into Sleep. It truly helps other people who are looking for a little peace at the end of their day find their way here. And we'd love to know, if you don't mind leaving it in the comments, roughly how many hours of sleep do you normally get each night? We're all in this together, whatever that number looks like for you. Now, find your most comfortable position. Maybe you've already turned down the lights. Maybe you're already tucked in, the duvet pulled up, the day beginning to soften at the edges. That's exactly where we want you to be. There's nothing you need to do tonight, nowhere to be, no decisions to make. Your only job, if you can even call it that, is to breathe slowly and let the words wash over you. If you fall asleep halfway through something, that is not a failure. That is the whole point. That is the most wonderful thing you could possibly do. So settle in, take one slow, easy breath, and let's drift up, past the clouds, past the blue, and into the dark, to one of the most remarkable places a human being has ever called home. 16 sunrises. Let's begin somewhere that might feel a little impossible to imagine from where you're lying right now. Picture yourself floating, not falling, not tumbling, just weightlessly suspended in a place where up and down have lost all meaning. Outside a small oval window, the earth curves away beneath you, enormous and impossibly blue. And every single 90 minutes, the sun rises again. Not once a day, 16 times. The International Space Station travels through space at roughly 28,000 kilometers per hour. That's about 17,500 miles per hour, if that means more to you. It's a number so large it barely feels real, and yet that speed is precisely what keeps the station in orbit. Too slow and gravity would win. Too fast and it would sail off into the dark. Right at that speed, it finds a kind of perfect equilibrium, falling endlessly around the earth in a graceful, unbroken arc. At that pace, one complete loop around our planet takes between 90 and 92 minutes. Think about that for a moment. In the time it takes most of us to watch a film, the crew of the International Space Station has circled the entire Earth. They have passed over oceans and mountain ranges and cities full of sleeping people just like you. They have watched an entire planet turn slowly beneath them. And so, the sun, from their perspective, rises and sets 16 times in every 24-hour period. 16 dawns, 16 dusks, all in a single day. It's one of those facts that sounds almost dreamlike, doesn't it? Something that belongs in a story rather than in a science report. And yet, it's simply what Tuesday looks like. 400 kilometers above your ceiling. Now, you might wonder, what does that actually feel like? NASA astronaut Sunita Williams, who spent time aboard the station during Expedition 32 and 33, has spoken beautifully about the experience of watching those daily sunsets. 16 of them, one after another, the sky shifting from black to gold to white and back again in a continuous, gentle rhythm. There is something almost meditative in imagining it. The sun appearing, arcing briefly across the darkness, and then disappearing again, over and over. A pulse of light, a heartbeat of the cosmos. Of course, for the people who actually live up there, those rapid cycles create a genuine challenge. Our bodies are built for one sunrise and one sunset per day. That single daily rhythm, the slow brightening of morning and the gradual dimming of evening, is the signal our brains have relied on for every single night of sleep in our evolutionary history. It's what tells our bodies when to release the hormones that make us feel drowsy and when to release the ones that make us feel awake and alert. 16 cycles a day throws all of that into chaos. And so, very early in the history of human spaceflight, scientists began to realize that orbit wasn't just a mechanical challenge. It wasn't just a question of rockets and fuel and trajectories. It was a deeply human challenge, a biological one. How do you give a person night when night arrives every 45 minutes and lasts for less than an hour? The answer, it turns out, involves some extraordinarily clever engineering, and we'll come to that in a little while. But for now, just rest with that image. The station, no larger from a distance than a bright, slow-moving star, tracing its quiet path above the sleeping world. 16 sunrises, 16 sunsets, and inside, a small group of human beings eating their dinner and writing their journals and brushing their teeth, doing their very best to feel like it's bedtime. There is something quietly wonderful about that, isn't there? The sheer ordinariness of daily life, tucked inside the most extraordinary circumstances imaginable. Now, the station itself sits at an altitude of approximately 400 kilometers above the Earth's surface. That's about 250 miles up. High enough that the atmosphere thins to almost nothing. High enough that the sky outside isn't blue at all. It's an absolute velvety, total black. The kind of dark that has never known a street lamp or a car headlight or the soft glow of a phone screen. A darkness that stretches in every direction without end. And yet there is light. Just not the kind we're used to. Not twinkling the way they do through our not twinkling the way they do through our atmosphere, but perfectly still and sharp, like tiny holes cut through a piece of black paper. And every 45 minutes or so, depending on the time of year and the angle of the station's orbit relative to the sun, there is that extraordinary, sudden sunrise. Light flooding in from the edge of the Earth's curve, cold and white and instant. The station was never designed to have evenings. It was designed to have UTC. Coordinated Universal Time, the international standard used by timekeeping organizations around the world, is the clock that everyone aboard agrees to follow. Not the sun, not the shadows, just the numbers on a shared clock. Midnight is midnight because everyone has agreed it is midnight. Morning is morning because the schedule says so. And somewhere in the deep, logical beauty of that arrangement, there is something that feels surprisingly peaceful. A decision made collectively to define the day in human terms rather than astronomical ones. To say, we will not be governed by the chaos of 16 sunrises. We will make our own rhythm. We will choose when it is time to rest, which, when you think about it, is not entirely unlike what many of us try to do when we reach for something soothing at the end of a long day, to create, however imperfectly, our own signal of night. A cup of tea, a dimmed lamp, a voice in your earphones telling you gently about the stars. You're doing exactly that right now, and that's a lovely thing. Let your breathing slow a little. Feel the weight of your body against the mattress. You are being held very gently by gravity, the same gravity that the station is perpetually outrunning at 28,000 kilometers per hour. You don't have to outrun anything tonight. You can just be still. The station keeps circling, the sun keeps rising and setting in its rapid, beautiful cycle, and you, down here in the dark, can let your eyes close whenever they feel ready. There's no rush at all. A room the size of a phone box. Now that we've settled into the rhythm of the station's orbit, let's float a little closer, past the solar panels, wide and gold in the perpetual light, through the outer hull into the warm, humming interior, and let's find where someone sleeps. It might surprise you to learn that the sleeping quarters aboard the International Space Station are roughly the size of a telephone box, not a generous telephone box, not one with room to stretch your arms out. A proper, compact, stand in it and close the door telephone box. About 2.1 cubic meters of private space, just enough room for a person, a sleeping bag, a small laptop, and a lamp. And that, on a spacecraft, is considered quite luxurious. In the early days of human space flight, there was no such thing as a dedicated sleeping space at all. The Apollo astronauts, on their way to and from the moon, simply slept wherever they could find room. The crew of Apollo 11, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, famously slept on the floor of the lunar module after their moonwalk, curled up in their suits in the cramped cabin while Mission Control quietly monitored their rest from 250,000 miles away. Later, Apollo missions used adjustable hammocks to keep crew members from drifting into the cold walls of the spacecraft during the night. It was improvised, uncomfortable, and entirely heroic. The shift to permanent orbital stations changed things slowly but meaningfully. When the International Space Station began its continuous human habitation on the 2nd of November in the year 2000, the very first crew, Commander Bill Shepard of NASA and cosmonauts Yuri Gudzenko and Sergei Krikalev of Russia, found themselves in a station that was still very much a construction site. The comforts were basic, the noise was constant, but they were there, and they were the beginning of something that has continued unbroken ever since. That date, the 2nd of November 2000, marked the start of a continuous human presence in space that has now stretched for over 2 decades. Every single day since then, without exception, there have been people living aboard that station, sleeping there, waking there, eating their meals and doing their experiments and looking out of the windows at the turning Earth below. That is a remarkable thing to sit with for a moment. Whatever has happened down here on the surface, whatever storms and seasons and years have passed, there have always been people up there, quietly circling, keeping watch. The sleeping quarters that exist aboard the station today are located primarily in a module called Harmony, which is also known as Node 2. Harmony is described as the utility hub of the station, the place where several key systems connect, and it houses 4 individual crew quarters, each one a small, private cabin built into what is called an integrated standard payload rack. Essentially the same kind of rack that elsewhere in the station might hold a science experiment or a piece of equipment has been repurposed into a place where a human being can close the door and, with some effort and a fair amount of goodwill, sleep. Each cabin is built from an aluminum alloy. The walls are lined with special insulating blankets, a golden-colored material called Captain, chosen for its exceptional thermal properties. Inside, there is acoustic paneling to muffle the constant sound of the station's machinery. There is a small lamp. There is an air vent, which we will come back to shortly because it is more important than it might sound. and there is a personal laptop, which serves as the astronauts' connection to their schedule, their communications, and, one imagines, a small thread of comfort on long, strange nights. The Russian segment of the station has its own sleeping spaces in a module called Zvezda, the Russian word for star. The Zvezda module contains what are known as kayutas, the Russian term for the small sleeping cabins, tucked into the walls of the module like berths on a very unconventional overnight train. Now, sleeping in microgravity presents one immediately obvious problem, and one problem that is considerably less obvious but considerably more important. The obvious one: you can't lie down. There is no down. In weightlessness, every direction is equally valid. The floor and the ceiling are the same. You could sleep on the wall if you liked. Many astronauts do exactly that. They anchor their sleeping bag to whatever surface happens to be nearby, strap themselves gently in, and let their body float in the loose, comfortable embrace of zero gravity. To recreate the sensation of being in a bed, the sleeping bags aboard the station contain a rigid backing, a firm cushion that presses gently against the astronaut's back. It is an engineered approximation of the feeling of a mattress, a small act of mimicry that tells the nervous system, in whatever language it understands, that this is safe, this is rest, this is familiar. The less obvious problem is the air. On Earth, when you breathe out, the carbon dioxide in your breath rises, it disperses. The air around you circulates naturally through the simple mechanism of warm air moving upward and cool air flowing in to replace it. You never have to think about this. It just happens, invisibly, effortlessly, all night long. In microgravity, none of that occurs. When a sleeping astronaut exhales, the carbon dioxide doesn't go anywhere. It simply stays. It accumulates in the air immediately around their face, forming what scientists describe rather unpoetically as a bubble of stale air. If that bubble is not disturbed, if the air around the sleeping person is not being actively moved and replaced, the carbon dioxide concentration near their face will begin to rise, and this matters more than you might expect. Research conducted in recent years has significantly revised downward the threshold at which elevated carbon dioxide begins to affect human cognition. It was once assumed that concentrations would need to reach quite high levels before any meaningful impairment occurred. But more recent studies have found that at concentrations of around 1,000 to 1,500 parts per million, which is not dramatically higher than normal indoor air, there are already measurable effects on complex decision-making. For an astronaut who needs to be alert and competent at all times, that is a serious concern. And so the air vents in each sleeping cabin are not a comfort feature. They are a safety requirement. The continuous quiet circulation of air through the crew quarters is as critical to the mission as any other system on the station. It is one of those facts that makes the whole enterprise feel both more technical and more tender at the same time. All of that engineering, all of that calculation and planning, and at the heart of it is simply this: making sure that someone sleeping in space can breathe safely through the night. You're breathing easily right now, in and out. The air in your room moves moving and refreshing itself without any effort on your part. There's something comforting in noticing that, in feeling the simple, reliable gift of a breath. Let your shoulders drop a little. Let your jaw unclench if it's been holding on to anything. The station hums on through its quiet circles, and in those small, golden-walled cabins 400 kilometers above you, someone is sleeping in their wall-mounted sleeping bag, the air vent whispering steadily beside them, carrying the night forward one soft breath at a time. The light that tells you when to sleep. There is a question that sounds almost philosophical, but turns out to be deeply practical, and it is this: how do you tell your body that it's night when the sun keeps rising every 45 minutes? The answer begins with a part of your eye that most people have never heard of. Tucked within the retina, alongside the rods and cones responsible for the vision you use every waking moment, there is a third type of cell. It was only discovered in the early 2000s, which makes it a remarkably recent addition to our understanding of human biology. These cells are called intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells. Researchers tend to use the abbreviation iPRGCs for reasons that will be immediately obvious. And unlike the cells responsible for seeing colors and shapes and the faces of the people you love, these cells have a single, specialized purpose. They measure light. Specifically, they measure the kind of light that tells your brain what time of day it is. These cells contain a photopigment called melanopsin, and they are most sensitive to short wavelength blue light at around 460 to 480 nanometers on the spectrum. When these cells detect that kind of light, they send a signal to a tiny region of the brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which sits in the hypothalamus and functions as the master clock of the entire body. And the message that signal carries is essentially this: it's daytime, stay awake, do not release melatonin. Melatonin, as you may know, is the hormone most closely associated with sleep. It doesn't knock you out. It doesn't force anything. It simply rises gradually in the hours before sleep, creating a gentle, spreading feeling of drowsiness, a biological dimming of the lights. And it is suppressed specifically and powerfully by blue light reaching those retinal ganglion cells, which creates an immediate problem aboard the International Space Station. Every 45 minutes, the station emerges from the Earth's shadow and the sun floods through the windows. The sunlight in low Earth orbit is not filtered by miles of atmosphere the way it is on the surface. It is direct, intense, and saturated with exactly the kind of blue light that those retinal ganglion cells are designed to detect. If an astronaut happens to glance out of the window during one of these sudden orbital dawns, the effect on their circadian system can be immediate and significant. Their melatonin suppresses, their internal clock shifts, and their carefully maintained sleep schedule, the one built around UTC, and the shared consensus of an agreed-upon midnight begins to drift. For many years, the station relied on standard fluorescent lighting It worked well enough in the sense that it illuminated the space and allowed people to do their jobs, but it offered no real ability to support the biological rhythms of the crew. The lights were either on or off, and the spectrum they emitted was fixed. In 2016, that changed. The station's fluorescent general luminaire assemblies were replaced with something far more sophisticated: solid-state lighting assemblies, which use LED technology. And what makes these assemblies remarkable is not simply that they are more efficient, though they are. It is that they can be tuned. Their color temperature, the warmth or coolness of the light they emit, can be adjusted to support different phases of the astronaut's day. The system operates across 3 distinct settings. For general daytime tasks, the lights produce a clean white light at around 4,800 to 4,900 Kelvin. Think of it as the clear, neutral light of a bright, overcast day. Functional, comfortable, appropriate for work. When the crew needs to be particularly alert, perhaps before a spacewalk or during a complex docking procedure, the lights can shift to a blue-enriched setting at around 6,500 Kelvin. This setting actively suppresses melatonin and promotes wakefulness. It is the lighting equivalent of a strong coffee. And then, in the hours before the scheduled sleep period, the lights shift again, down to around 2,700 Kelvin, a warm, amber-toned glow, deep and soft and deliberately depleted of the blue wavelengths that would keep those retinal ganglion cells firing. The biological equivalent of candlelight, a signal to the body that the day is ending, that the melatonin can begin to rise, that it is, in every meaningful sense, time to wind down. This system is called the dynamic lighting schedule, and the data suggests that it works. Crews following the dynamic schedule show significantly less circadian drift than those on static lighting, meaning their internal clocks stay better aligned with their actual sleep windows. They fall asleep more easily. They sleep longer. Their bodies receive something closer to the coherent signal they evolved to need. It is, in a way, a beautiful piece of engineering, not a rocket engine or a heat shield, just light. Warm light at the right time, cool light at the right time, the oldest cue in the human body's entire repertoire, recreated with quiet precision inside an aluminium laboratory orbiting the Earth at 17,000 miles per hour. There is a lesson in that, perhaps, for those of us lying in our own beds tonight. In our eyes that the day is still going, the brightness that tells those ancient cells in our eyes that the day is still going, that sleep should wait a little longer. Our bodies are not being difficult when they resist sleep in bright conditions. They are doing exactly what they were designed to do, responding faithfully to a signal that was meaningful for 100,000 years before electric light existed. Dimming the lights in the evening, moving toward warmer, softer tones as bedtime approaches, these are not just pleasant habits. They are a form of kindness to the most fundamental biological clock you possess. The station does it with remarkable precision. With data and engineering and scheduled lighting transitions timed to the minute. You can do a version of it simply by reaching over and switching off the lamp. which, if you haven't already, you might consider doing now. The room doesn't need to be completely dark unless that's what you prefer. Just softer, just easier, just a little more like the signal your body has been waiting for. Let the warmth of the darkness settle around you. Let your eyes stop working quite so hard. The world outside is still there, and it will be there in the morning. But right now, in this moment, it doesn't need your attention. The station is somewhere above you, its lights carefully tuned to the deep amber of pre-sleep. Its crew are winding down in their small, insulated cabins, the air vents sighing beside them. And you are winding down too. Breathe in, breathe out. Let the light go. Before we continue our journey around the earth tonight, a gentle word for anyone who finds that sleep doesn't always come easily, even on the quietest of evenings. If you're someone who struggles to drift off or who wakes in the night and can't quite find their way back, we keep our video description updated with things that might help. Little finds, tools, and reads that we think are worth knowing about. No pressure at all, just a quiet resource there whenever you might want it, right? Let's carry on floating. The sound of silence, that isn't. You might imagine that space is silent, and in the truest sense, out there beyond the hull, it is. Sound requires a medium to travel through, molecules to carry the vibration from one place to another, and in the vacuum of space, there are essentially none, no air, no transmission, no sound at all. But inside the International Space Station, it is never quiet, not even close. Clean. The carbon dioxide scrubbed from clean. The carbon dioxide scrubbed from the atmosphere. Pumps cycle, fans spin, compressors hum, coolant moves through pipes in the walls. Experimental hardware whirs and clicks in the laboratory modules, and all of that mechanical activity produces noise. Constant, unavoidable, omnipresent noise. Engineers use a measurement system called noise criterion curves, or NC curves, to describe the acceptable level of sound across different frequencies in a given space. Each curve represents a combination of sound pressure levels across the spectrum, from low rumbling bass to high-pitched treble. And the target for the crew quarters aboard the station, the small sleeping cabins where astronauts are supposed to be resting, is NC40. NC40 is roughly equivalent to the ambient sound level inside a quiet public library. Not silent, not even particularly hushed, but calm enough in theory that a person could sleep. In the Harmony module often reaches NC52. In the Harmony module often reaches NC52. The laboratory modules run higher still. Sound bleeds through walls. It travels through the metal structure of the station itself, conducted through the hull and the racks and the connecting nodes like a whisper passing through a tin can telephone. And so the sleeping cabins are engineered with acoustic dampening materials, panels designed to absorb sound energy rather than reflect it, to create a pocket of relative quiet inside a machine that never stops talking. Recent acoustic surveys from 2023 and 2024 have revealed that some parts of the station are struggling to meet their noise targets. In the U.S. laboratory module, average sound pressure levels have been exceeding the requirements in certain frequency ranges by a small but meaningful margin. The culprit, in many cases, has been the pump package assembly, the hardware responsible for thermal management of the station's payload racks, running at higher speeds than usual to keep pace with the heat generated by experiments and equipment. It is a very human kind of problem. The station is working harder, and the cost of that work is a slightly noisier night. Astronauts have developed various personal strategies for managing the acoustic environment. Earplugs are standard issue. Some crew members play music or ambient sound through headphones. Some simply adapt over time, their brains learning to filter out the particular frequencies of the station's mechanical hum, the way a person living near a motorway eventually stops hearing the traffic. But adaptation is not the same as rest, and the research into how noise affects sleep quality makes for sobering reading. Studies from shuttle missions going back decades documented astronauts being woken 5 to 8 times per night by crew activity and airborne noise, even in conditions where the background level was within acceptable limits. It isn't just the overall volume that matters, it's the unexpected sounds, the sudden spike, the unfamiliar clank or vibration that the sleeping brain registers as potentially significant, potentially dangerous, and responds to by waking up. Our brains are extraordinarily vigilant during sleep, far more so than we tend to appreciate when we are awake. The sleeping mind is not absent. It is monitoring, processing, running checks, ready to surface in an instant if something in the environment suggests a threat. That vigilance served our ancestors very well in the savannas and forests where human sleep evolved. In the metal corridors of a space station, it creates a rather persistent problem. And this is something that many people lying in bed tonight will recognize from their own experience. The dripping tap that becomes impossible to ignore. The car alarm in the distance. The creak of the house settling in the cold. Sounds that in daylight would barely register, but at 2 a.m. seem to fill the entire room. Your brain is not being unreasonable. It is doing its job. It is just doing a job that was designed for a very different world. One of the things that many people find helpful, and which the acoustic engineers aboard the station have also recognized, is not the elimination of all sound, but the introduction of a consistent, predictable, unvarying background. The crew quarters have their air vents, which we've already visited. Those vents produce a soft, continuous flow of white noise, a steady, featureless sound that the brain quickly classifies as non-threatening and learns to ignore. Beneath that constant layer, sudden spikes and anomalies are less jarring, less likely to pull a sleeping person back to the surface. It is the acoustic equivalent of the warm amber lighting, a gentle, reliable signal that says, "This is familiar, this is safe, there is nothing here that requires your attention." The sound of this voice, if it's doing its job, might be working in a similar way for you right now. A steady, unhurried presence, something for the vigilant part of your brain to rest its attention on, so that the rest of you can let go. You don't need to follow every word. In fact, it's rather better if you don't. Let the sentences become less distinct. Let the meaning soften at the edges. Let it become gradually just a sound among sounds, warm and continuous and entirely unthreatening. The station's pumps cycle on. The fans spin their steady rotations. The air moves through the vents in the sleeping cabins, that soft, constant breath of the machine, keeping its human passengers alive and comfortable in the dark. And somewhere in one of those cabins, an astronaut has their earplugs in and their sleeping bag zipped up and their eyes closed, the acoustic panels doing their quiet work around them. It is not perfect silence. It was never going to be perfect silence, but it is enough, and enough on most nights is all we ever really need. Let your body grow a little heavier. Let your thoughts become a little less insistent. The sounds around you, whatever they are tonight, are familiar. They are known. They have nothing new to tell you. You can let them pass. What the dark side of the Earth looks like. There is a room aboard the International Space Station unlike any other room that has ever existed. It sits at the very bottom of the station, jutting outward from the main structure like a small glass blister on the hull. It has 7 windows, 6 arranged in a ring around the sides, and one larger one pointing directly downward toward the Earth. It was designed primarily as an observation and work port, a place where astronauts could monitor spacewalks and guide robotic operations. But it has become something else entirely, something that nobody quite anticipated when they were drafting the engineering specifications. It has become the most extraordinary window seat in the history of human experience. It is called the cupola. From the cupola, the view of the night side of the Earth is unlike anything that can be adequately described in words, though many astronauts have tried. The planet below is dark, but not empty. It is alive with light in ways that are both human and entirely natural, layered one upon another in a display that has moved grown adults to tears on a fairly regular basis. Let's look at what's down there. The most immediately striking feature, on a clear pass over a populated region, is the city lights. From 400 kilometers up, urban centers glow with a distinctive warm yellow, the color of sodium street lamps, the accumulated light of millions of windows and roads and car parks and signs. Major cities appear as bright clusters, connected to one another by thin threads of light along motorways and rail lines. The whole network of human habitation rendered visible in a single glance. Astronauts have described flying over the western coast of North America at night and seeing Portland and Seattle and Vancouver as brilliant yellow pools of light against the absolute darkness of the Pacific Ocean to the west and the deep shadow of the Cascade Mountain Range to the east. The light of human civilization seen from space is both humbling and oddly moving, a reminder that down there, in all that warm glow, are billions of people going about their evenings, cooking dinner, putting children to bed, sitting quietly just as you are now. But the human lights are only the beginning. Higher in the atmosphere, at altitudes of between 80 and 300 kilometers, something extraordinary happens every night. During the day, ultraviolet radiation from the sun energizes molecules of nitrogen and oxygen in the upper atmosphere, exciting them to higher energy states. At night, with the sun gone, those molecules begin to release that stored energy. They recombine, and as they do, they emit light. This phenomenon is called air glow or night glow, and from the cupola it appears as soft, luminous bands stretched across the limb of the Earth, the curved edge where the planet meets space. Bands of green, of orange, of deep red, layered like the colors in a very slow, very gentle aurora. They are not bright enough to illuminate the ground below. They are not visible to the naked eye from the surface. But from orbit, looking sideways across the atmosphere, they are unmistakable, a faint, constant luminescence, the Earth breathing out light into the dark. NASA astronaut Johnny Kim, a former Navy SEAL who trained as a doctor before becoming an astronaut, has captured time-lapse footage of the Earth's night side that shows this airglow in extraordinary detail. Watching those images, the Earth looks almost alive, softly radiant, quietly glowing in the dark like something that knows it is being watched and is trying in its own enormous way to be beautiful. And then there are the auroras, when the sun releases energetic particles in what are called solar wind events. Those particles travel across space and interact with the Earth's magnetic field. They are funneled toward the polar regions and collide with atmospheric gases at high altitudes, exciting them to emit light in shimmering, rippling curtains. On the surface, the aurora borealis and aurora australis are breathtaking. From orbit, they are something else entirely. Astronauts aboard the station don't look up at the auroras. They look down at them, or sometimes directly across at them, at eye level. They see the curtains of green and crimson light from above, the full three-dimensional structure of the phenomenon visible all at once. The way the light ripples and folds, the way it moves, not like a solid thing, but like something between light and liquid, like a vast, slow conversation between the sun and the planet. The crew often gathers at the cupola when auroras are visible. Whatever is scheduled, whatever experiments are running, there tends to be a quiet, collective agreement that this is worth stopping for. Single orbital pass over the tropics might result in a single lightning strike, but the odds of a single strike are low. Single orbital pass over the tropics might reveal dozens of thunderstorms simultaneously, each one pulsing with light. The clouds lit from inside like paper lanterns. The lightning moves at the same speed it always does, but the silence of watching it from space gives it a different quality, slower seeming somehow, more deliberate, more beautiful. There is a concept that comes up again and again in accounts from astronauts. Something that researchers and psychologists have studied and named, though the naming of it perhaps makes it sound more clinical than it is. It is called the overview effect. It describes a cognitive and emotional shift that occurs when a human being sees the Earth from the outside. Not in a photograph, not on a screen, but truly sees it with their own eyes, through a window suspended in the dark above it. The borderlessness of it, the thinness of the atmosphere, that fragile blue line at the edge of the planet that contains everything that has ever lived. the absence of the lines that appear on every map, the borders and boundaries and divisions that feel so significant from within them and become completely invisible from 400 kilometers up. Astronaut Nicole Stott, reflecting on the experience, described how it changed her sense of home. Florida was no longer simply where she was from. It had become, in her words, a special part of home, which is Earth. The whole planet, seen whole, understood as a single place. That shift, that expansion, is what the overview effect names. And those who have experienced it describe it as one of the most profound things that has ever happened to them. It is a particular kind of peace, perhaps, the peace that comes from seeing something in its entirety, from stepping far enough back that the details that seemed so urgent and so large become small, and the thing itself, the whole beautiful, fragile, extraordinary thing becomes visible at last. You can't see the Earth from orbit tonight, but you are part of it. Right now, in your bed, in your room, in your house or flat, or wherever you are part of the thing that those astronauts look down at from the cupola and feel moved to tears by. You are part of what glows in the dark. Let that sit with you for a moment as your breathing slows and your body grows heavier and the edges of the day soften and dissolve. The station passes overhead, its windows full of light and wonder. Below it, the Earth turns in its slow, ancient rotation. The cities glow. The air glow breathes. The auroras ripple in their silent solar conversation. And you are here, quietly, warmly, safely here. That's enough. That is more than enough. Close your eyes whenever they're ready. The view will still be there. The people who watch while you sleep. There is something quietly reassuring about knowing that while you sleep, somewhere in the world, people are awake and paying attention. Not to you specifically, though that's a comforting thought in its own right, but to the systems that keep things running, the infrastructure of the night, the quiet professional vigil that most of us never think about and almost never see. Aboard the International Space Station, that vigil is continuous, international, and extraordinarily detailed. Mission Control Center Houston, known to the people who work there simply as MCCH, operates around the clock without pause. The Flight Control Room, FCR-1, is staffed at all hours by a rotating team of flight controllers, each one responsible for a specific system or set of systems aboard the station. They work in 3 shifts, handing over to one another at intervals, ensuring that no single person is ever asked to carry the weight of continuous vigilance alone. The roles have names that sound almost like characters in a novel. The flight director holds overall responsibility for the safety of the mission and the well-being of the crew. Every significant decision flows through the flight director. They are, in the most literal sense, the person in charge of keeping human beings alive in space. The Capcom, short for Capsule Communicator, is the only person who speaks directly to the crew during normal operations. A tradition that dates back to the earliest days of NASA, rooted in the belief that astronauts would respond better to a voice they recognized, someone who had trained as they had, and understood what they were experiencing. The Capcom is the human bridge between the station and the ground. The ADCO, the Attitude, Determination, and Control Officer, manages the orientation of the station itself. This matters more than it might sound. The station must be angled correctly relative to the sun to keep its solar panels generating power. It must be oriented to maintain the right thermal profile, ensuring that some parts of the hull are absorbing heat and others are radiating it away. Getting this wrong, even slightly, has cascading consequences for every system aboard. And the ethos, the Environmental and Thermal Operating Systems Officer, monitors the atmosphere inside the station, the temperature, the humidity, the carbon dioxide levels, the oxygen concentration, the quality of the air that the sleeping crew is breathing right now in their small, insulated cabins 400 kilometers above the surface. Someone is watching that. Someone always is. Across the planet, in Moscow, a parallel team is doing the same work for the Russian segment of the station. The two mission control centers are connected by a network of communication links and a system of remote interface officers who manage the relay between them. Because Houston and Moscow are in different time zones separated by 8 hours, there is always one center in its working day, while the other is in its evening. The station is never, at any moment, without a ground team in full daylight and full readiness. It is a beautiful piece of cooperative engineering when you think about it. Two nations with a complicated history and a shared commitment to keeping people alive in space, taking turns watching through the night. The flight controllers themselves face their own version of the challenges we've been exploring all evening. Working rotating shifts, including overnight shifts, creates significant disruption to the circadian rhythms of the people doing the watching. Studies of flight controllers, both Japanese and American, have identified a high prevalence of what is called shift work sleep disorder, a condition characterized by insomnia during intended sleep periods and excessive sleepiness during intended wake periods. The very people responsible for managing the sleep health of astronauts in orbit are themselves struggling with the consequences of disrupted schedules on the ground. During long overnight shifts, controllers report napping in the majority of night shifts, a strategy that research broadly supports as an effective tool for maintaining cognitive function during extended wakefulness. And caffeine, that most ancient and universal of alertness aids, is consumed in quantities that will surprise nobody who has ever worked a night shift. There is something very human about that detail. All of that technology, all of that training and protocol and engineering, and at some point in the small hours, someone in Mission Control Houston is quietly making their third cup of coffee and reminding themselves why they chose this job. The reason, for most of them, is not hard to find. It is the same reason that draws people to look up at the night sky, the sense of participating in something larger than ordinary life, of being connected, however tenuously, to the extraordinary fact of human beings living in space. On any given night, the station carries a crew of between 3 and 7 people. They are sleeping or trying to sleep in their small cabins while the machinery hums around them. Their heart rates are monitored. Their sleep cycles are tracked where possible. Their schedules are planned to give them 8.5 hours in their sleeping bags, though the research consistently shows that they tend to get somewhere closer to 6. 6 hours on a spacecraft in orbit, surrounded by the noise of life support systems, the rapid alternation of light and dark outside the windows, and the constant low-level awareness of being somewhere that no human body was ever designed to be. It is perhaps not surprising that sleep in space is difficult. What is surprising and genuinely moving is how hard everyone works to make it as good as it possibly can be. The lighting engineers and their dynamic schedules, the acoustic teams monitoring the noise in the sleeping cabins, the ethos officer checking the CO2 levels through the night, the Capcom ready to speak if something needs to be said. All of that care, all of that attention directed at the basic, ancient, irreplaceable human need to close your eyes and rest. We spend roughly a third of our lives asleep. It is not wasted time. It is not passive time. The sleeping brain is profoundly active, consolidating memories, clearing metabolic waste, regulating hormones, repairing tissues, processing the emotional residue of the day. Sleep is not the absence of life. It is one of life's most essential processes. The station knows this. NASA classifies sleep disruption as a Category 1 risk for long-duration spaceflight, the most serious category. The one reserved for things that can genuinely compromise a mission, endanger a crew, undermine years of preparation, and billions of dollars of work. Sleep is that important, even up there, perhaps especially up there. And it is that important down here too, in the quiet of your room, in the ordinary, extraordinary miracle of a warm bed and a dark enough sky and a body that knows, if you let it, exactly what to do. You don't need a flight director or a Capcom or an ethos officer watching over you tonight. Though in a sense, in the most gentle and metaphorical of senses, that's a little bit of what this voice is trying to be. Just a quiet presence, paying attention, keeping watch while you drift. The controllers in Houston are at their consoles. The team in Moscow is at theirs. The station is on its 300 and something thousandth orbit of the Earth, carrying its small crew through the perpetual dark and light and dark again. And you are here, growing heavier and softer and slower with every breath. Let someone else do the watching for a while. You've earned the rest. And so we come, gently, to the end of our time together tonight. We've traveled quite a distance, you and I. We floated alongside a station circling the Earth at 17,000 miles per hour. We tucked ourselves into a sleeping cabin the size of a telephone box and learned why the air vent beside your head is the most important piece of furniture in the room. We watched the lights change from cool and bright to warm and amber, that quiet biological kindness built into the walls. We listened to the hum of machinery and found within it something almost soothing. We looked down from the cupola at lightning storms and auroras and the soft glow of cities full of sleeping people. And we thought about the quiet professionals watching their screens through the night, making sure everything keeps running while the crew rests. It is a remarkable place, the International Space Station. Remarkable not just for what it is, but for what it represents. The stubborn, beautiful human insistence on going further, on asking what's out there, on sending people into the dark and then working tirelessly, creatively, lovingly to keep them safe and well and rested while they're there. And now the music is going to take over for a while. This is my favorite part to tell you about because it means your work here is done. There is nothing left to follow, nothing left to understand. Just sound and space and the gentle drift of a mind that has permission to go wherever it wants to go. Let it wander, let it float, let it do whatever quiet, private, wonderful thing sleeping minds do when nobody is asking anything of them. Maybe you're already most of the way there. Maybe the station is already a distant memory and you're somewhere softer and stranger and entirely your own. That's exactly right. That's exactly where you should be. Thank you for spending this part of your night with Orbit into Sleep. It is a genuine privilege to be part of your bedtime, and we don't take it lightly. Sleep well wherever you are. You are part of a planet that glows in the dark, and that is a wonderful thing to be. Good night.